Whether it's through technological development and the visuals of games, or simply how our interactions and consumption has changed over time, the video games industry continues to develop. The notable change we will focus on in this short film is gender representation in video games. After a brief overview of the history of gender representation in video games, we will be looking at the company Naughty Dog and how the characters in their games The Last of Us and Uncharted present the representation of men and women, and ask whether the old days of stereotyping and unfair representation are over. In 2006, Jeff King and Tanya Krewinska argued that the history of video games is one that has been dominated on one level, by investment in increasing realism at the level of graphical representation and allied effects. Further to this, on the subject of player characters, they argue that player characters range from the excessive in appearance, the likes of Lara Croft and Duke Nukem, to more ordinary figures such as the protagonists of Max Payne, The Getaway and Silent Hill. What can be argued with the mention of Lara Croft, for example, is that it's abnormal for a video game protagonist to be a woman and a male character is the normal for this character type. This could just be down to the fact that the introduction of Lara Croft was one of the first times a game had a female character as the lead, and yet she was completely sexualized. Even in more recent iterations of Tomb Raider, Lara's outfit remains more or less the same as it was in earlier games, which just shows us how little the representation in these games has developed over time. In more modern games, this representation is becoming less apparent and more female characters are being portrayed as heroes, both in small ways as a side character, getting the hero out of trouble,
Hey, Pete. MJ?
or bigger ways such as having a section of the game playable as these characters, or even a full-length game where they are portrayed as the main hero and main protagonist of the story. A notable example of a game that ignores the idea of male characters being the ordinary protagonist of a video game, or does a better job of presenting it less, is The Last of Us. The Last of Us is a game by Naughty Dog exclusively for PlayStation, initially released in 2013. The game follows the story of characters Joel and Ellie in a world overthrown by a zombie apocalypse, with the goal of taking Ellie to a group known as the Fireflies because they think she is the key to a vaccine for the infection as she is immune. What makes this game so special is the female representation that is consistent throughout. The female character Ellie is not seen always needing help from her male counterpart Joel, but rather helping Joel and saving him from danger on more than one occasion. The player is also given a section in the game where they play solely as Ellie during winter. With Joel injured from a previous encounter, Ellie is left to nurse Joel back to health, while keeping herself safe at the same time. This story is even further explained in the add-on DLC Left Behind, where the player dives deeper into Ellie's past before she met Joel, or even before she was bitten, while showing the struggles she went through during winter to keep her and Joel alive. In an interview about the game, Ellie's voice and motion capture actress Ashley Johnson talked about her experience with the character and what makes her so special, not just to her but also to younger audiences now having a video game character they can actually connect with.
To sort of be such a strong female character that is completely normal looking, regular t-shirt and jeans, and she's 14 and she is still a total badass, is really exciting to be a part of that.
The representation of Ellie being a hero of this series doesn't just stop when the credits roll and the game ends. Several years after the initial release of The Last of Us, a sequel was made, and with it, Ellie was given much more screen time, character development, and represented as the hero of the story after the brutal demise of Joel.
Joel, please get up!
Spoilers. In this story, Ellie also has the help from a new character, Dina. Dina is a romantic interest for Ellie as well. Ellie, being a member of the LGBTQ+ community, was briefly seen in the Left Behind DLC, but in The Last of Us Part 2, this is explored much more and in greater detail. Dina wasn't the only new character introduced in The Last of Us Part 2, however. Part 2 also introduced us to Abby Anderson. Unfortunately, fans didn't take too kindly to her. She seemed to be hated for one reason and one reason only, because she killed Joel. This hate even went as far as the voice actress Laura Bailey receiving a number of hateful comments and even death threats on Twitter shortly after the game was released. The character of Abby was also not very well received due to her appearance. An article that was published about the game stated that people have suggested real women could never look like Abby, that it isn't possible to bulk up in a post-apocalyptic world, and that she must be transgender. She isn't. The idea behind Abby's appearance could have also been that Naughty Dog wanted to create a character very different to those created in previous games such as Nathan Drake in the Uncharted series. From its 2007 debut with Uncharted Drake's Fortune, the series has grown massively in story, gameplay and representation. The main protagonist of the main 4 Uncharted games is Nathan Drake. Drake is a wisecracking hero who can never resist a bad joke, even in the tensiest of situations.
We were almost in that.
Naughty Dog's plan for Drake's character was to make a regular guy with no special abilities or immense power, just a regular guy that any of us could be. He was also made to be the opposite of the stereotypical macho man seen in films like Indiana Jones or James Bond, in order to make him more realistic and more relatable as a character. This came to be one of his biggest strengths, but also one of his biggest downfalls. Players loved a character that they could easily relate to. Unlike most video game characters at the time, Drake felt a lot more human. He did feel pain if he was injured, and he struggled to meet his objectives. To add to his humanity even more, his costume seen throughout the games is a very simple jeans and t-shirt. This costume was seen very early on in the reveal trailer for Drake's Fortune at E3 2006 and would carry on into the official release in 2007, as well as every other game that would follow. All of this combined created a character that was and is still loved today by millions of people around the world. However, just like with anything, the series had its fair share of problems at initial release. While the characteristics of Drake, as mentioned before, became one of his strongest points when Uncharted Drake's Fortune released, it also became one of his downfalls. Journalists failed to see the difference between these games and the Tomb Raider games. They questioned why gamers would want to play a copy of Tomb Raider featuring a regular guy with a half-tucked t-shirt, jokingly calling the game Dude Raider. Despite this, Naughty Dog continued with Uncharted, and 4 more games on the PS3 and PS4 were made, along with a single game on the PS Vita, making a total of 6 games over the years. Drake wasn't the only selling point for the games, however, nor was it the amazing visuals or gameplay that came with each release. Another reason the Uncharted series is loved is their representation of female characters. The main female protagonist of the first Uncharted game is Elena Fisher. Elena stands as the voice of reason. You may not always like what she has to say, but you know she's always right. Similar to Ellie in The Last of Us, Elena is seen getting Drake out of trouble or helping him on his adventures.
How much trouble could one girl be?
Well, come on!
The release of Uncharted 2 Among Thieves also brought in a new character, Chloe Fraser. Chloe's representation in the game was almost the complete opposite of Elena. She's a lot more flirty towards Drake and cares more about the treasure rather than the adventure itself. So, when Elena returned in Uncharted 2, it made for some hilarious and awkward moments between the characters, with Drake stuck in the middle of it all. In fact, the character of Chloe was loved so much by fans that in 2017, she appeared in her own adventure Uncharted: The Lost Legacy, alongside Nadine Ross, a character from the previous game Uncharted 4: A Thief's End. Nadine is a much more powerful character who even has her own army to back her up. She stands as one of many examples that a game doesn't need a male character to be the hero and a female character to be there for desire or for the sake of having a female character. Likewise, with the character of Nathan Drake, He stands as proof that male characters don't need to be super masculine and macho, they can be a regular guy and still be loved by millions. Looking at all of the characters we have in this film, it's clear to see that Naughty Dog has done a reasonable job at representing male and female characters in video games. Uncharted and The Last of Us serve as prime examples of the fact you don't need to follow the stereotypes of what a male or female character needs to be in order to make a successful game.